I'd feel horrible denying the cast of Jerry Paris's Genius for even a single episode. I'd feel so uncomfortable.
Ron Howard's Secret Blacklist, 7 stars who ruined the composure of Hollywood's nicest director. Ron Howard. The name is synonymous with patience, professionalism, and a never-ending smile. But even Hollywood's most beloved man has a limit, a list of 7 superstars he has sworn never to work with again. These collaborations were more than just failed projects. They were protracted, career-destroying battles that permanently altered Ron Howard's vision of the boundary between genius and chaos. Below is the story of the friends, mentors, and heroes who pushed Ron Howard to the brink. Chevy Chase, the mobile disaster Ron Howard refused to touch. Late 1980s, Ron Howard didn't need to work with Chevy Chase to put him on the blacklist. Just hearing the name was enough. In the late 1980s, Universal, in an attempt to create a comedy blockbuster, proposed pairing Howard, the rising star director, with Chase, who had a notorious reputation from Saturday Night Live. Howard flatly refused before the first meeting was even scheduled. His word to producer Brian Grazer was definitive: "I won't babysit a hurricane." At the time, Chase's reputation was spreading across Hollywood like wildfire, stories of him clashing with nearly every cast member, insulting writers, and calling colleagues lazy. Howard took these stories as a warning. When Chase heard of Howard's refusal, he reportedly mocked the director at a party, saying, "He only works with nice people. Must be boring as hell." Howard's reaction was cold and precise, shaping his philosophy. That is exactly the point. For Howard, chaos was not worth any shot. Even decades later, when asked about directing Chase, his answer was quick and definitive: "Some chaos isn't worth capturing on film." Marlon Brando, the god who turned into a nightmare, mid-1990s, Ron Howard once described the experience bitterly. Working with Marlon Brando was like trying to reason with a storm. Their conflict was short-lived but unforgettable in the mid-1990s. Brando arrived on set with palpable discomfort. He ignored rehearsals, refused to memorize any lines, every prompt had to be taped around the set, and completely ignored Ron Howard. The climax came one afternoon when Brando stopped filming, declaring, "These lines are garbage. Rewrite them now." Howard tried to reason, but Brando just smiled and wandered off towards his trailer for 3 hours. When he returned, he decided his character needed a new accent, and no one knew what he was doing. Howard, famous for his infinite patience, began to lose control. In private, he told the crew, "This isn't acting, this is sabotage." Brando's unpredictability ruined the schedule, drained the budget, and publicly humiliated Howard. The dream of working with an idol turned into a nightmare that made Ron Howard vow never to mistake genius for madness again. Tom Cruise, when perfection turned into war, 1992. Far and Away. It's hard to imagine Ron Howard, Hollywood's calmest director, facing off against Tom Cruise, the most powerful star of the 90s. But during the 1992 epic Far and Away, this dream pairing became one of the biggest power struggles in cinematic history. The conflict erupted between Cruise's intense, always-on explosiveness and the order and patience Howard desired. Their visions couldn't have been more different. One fateful afternoon in Dublin, during a rain-drenched scene, Cruise stopped halfway through, threw his gloves down, and yelled, "This isn't real." Howard's face hardened. He just looked and said simply, sharply, "Real isn't about the noise, Tom." After that moment of dead silence, Cruise began rewriting blocking, demanded retakes, arguing the scene needed blood, not composure. Howard's smile vanished. He started filming extra coverage because he didn't trust Cruise to perform the same way twice. Months later, when asked about the experience, Howard only replied, "Some people confuse passion with disruption." He never cast Cruise in a film again. Mel Gibson, The Power Struggle That Shattered Ransom, 1996. Ron Howard thought he was hiring an Oscar-winning professional, Braveheart, but instead, he got a battlefield on the set of the 1996 film Ransom. Gibson didn't just act in the film, he wanted to command it. He tore apart Howard's tight script structure. He questioned the lighting, rewrote lines between takes, and issued commands like a second director. In one heated argument, witnesses recount that Gibson slammed the script onto the table and yelled, "I know what the audience wants. I want an Oscar for it." Howard's reply was gentle but razor-sharp, cutting the air. "You're not the director of this film, Mel." From that day on, every shot felt like a duel. Gibson refused to do multiple takes, while Howard began filming coverage without telling him. The tension was so toxic that Universal executives had to visit the set twice to keep things from imploding. Although Ransom was a success, Howard called it the most draining project of my life. The exhaustion was definitive. He never reunited with Gibson. Jim Carrey, the green monster that stole Howard's sanity. 2000 How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Ron Howard once joked that 2000's How the Grinch Stole Christmas nearly stole his sanity. What started as a Christmas fantasy turned into the most chaotic experience of his career, all because of Jim Carrey. Carrey had to endure 8 hours a day in latex and fur. By the third day, he was irritable towards everyone. On one infamous morning, Carrey stormed off the set and yelled, "You try acting in a rubber coffin." Carrey began improvising entire scenes without warning, changing lines mid-take, and occasionally throwing the script to the floor. Howard's usual composure cracked. The production spiraled so far out of control that the studio had to bring in a Navy SEAL survival expert to train Carrey to tolerate the costume and keep him from quitting. When filming wrapped, Howard looked exhausted. In private, he admitted the shoot aged him several years. The film became a classic, but the damage was permanent. Howard never collaborated with Carrey again. Hugh Grant, the intolerable polite smirk. Early 2000s, the conflict with Hugh Grant didn't happen on a movie set, but at a boardroom table in Hollywood in the early 2000s, as Howard was considering Grant for a romantic comedy project. Grant arrived late, was dismissive, and openly mocked the Hollywood system upon which Howard had built his career. "You Americans think emotions need to be explosions," he reportedly quipped, smirking as Howard sat in silence. Grant dissected the script, calling it too sentimental. It wasn't a joke, but clear condescension. By the end of the meeting, Howard quietly closed his notebook and said, "I think we are looking for different things." The phrase ended the collaboration. Grant continued to publicly deride American directors as too serious, and Ron Howard, feeling insulted, ensured Grant's name never appeared on his production list again. Russell Crowe, the genius who broke the final composure, 2001 and 2004, Russell Crowe is the exception, having collaborated twice, but the second time was the last. During A Beautiful Mind, 2001, they clashed silently, but the film brought Oscar glory. However, Cinderella Man, 2004, turned that tension into open hostility. Howard called it the most difficult film of his life. Crowe stepped onto the set not as an actor, but as a general ready for war. He wanted to control, command, and challenge every one of Howard's choices. In the middle of a brutal boxing scene, Crowe yelled across the ring, "You don't understand the character's pain." Howard silently stared back, but was intensely furious. The tension made the entire crew whisper, "It feels like watching two giants trying to overpower each other." In private, Howard confided to producers that directing Crowe was like riding a bull while trying to build a cathedral. Even after the critically acclaimed film, Howard's answer about another collaboration never changed. Once was more than enough. These 7 names are not just lessons learned, they are the marks of destruction that even a man as composed as Ron Howard couldn't erase. Which of these giants surprised you the most? Share your thoughts.